Hello, everybody. How you doing today? I know I took last week off as far as readings go, but that's because I was busy getting my second Pfizer vaccine shot. And, you know, it wrecked me pretty good for a couple days. But afterwards, the feeling of an intense hangover was swept away by this, legit physical euphoria that still hasn't completely subsided. Like, I can feel just a touch of it singing faintly in my blood, and it's a delight. So I have kind of a longer reading this week. I am currently in deep deadline mode, working on the new draft of the Ballad of Perilous Graves. And I'm turning in at the end of the month. So I'm going to read a little bit from that. It's kind of a longer stretch. But here's what I'll say beforehand. This character of Casey is trans, and one of the most difficult parts of writing these flashback scenes that take place well before the main matter of the story is using female pronouns for him. And exactly whether that is appropriate is still up for grabs. I haven't settled on it. One of the major inspirations for this character is someone who I did consult with to find out what he thought was appropriate in this case. And so, at least for the time being, I've gone with that. But anyway, if you hear me mess up the pronouns while I read this, that's exactly why. So here it goes. Casey drew old girl to a halt and turned off the engine. By now, the sun was setting in this sector of the Ninth Ward, or was this bunny friend, had not fared well in the storm. Here, the streets were cracked and humped, desperately in need of care. Casey looked at the scrubby grass and dandelions trying to force their way into the world and thought of what his cousin had said about not belonging. The one time Casey had felt he belonged anywhere, it had all come apart in the space of a few weeks. First the evacuation, then watching on the news in their Memphis hotel room as the levees broke and New Orleans was left to die. Before the storm, the city had felt like some sort of alternate universe situated at right angles to the conventional world. But Casey had never believed that was really true. New Orleans was still America, of course, one of its greatest cities. Surely not even a rich, post-dumb faux cowboy like Bush Jr. would consider leaving her to drown. But he had. They had. Casey shook his head. No use reliving storm trauma. On the other side of the street stood a square, two-story building that reminded Case of classic westerns, though he wasn't sure why. It didn't look like a Spanish mission or a Wild West saloon. No, it was a theater? Jalen's Jordans crunched on the gravel as he approached. "You ever hear of Club Desire?" he asked. "I thought that was a sex club in the CBD. Nigga," Jalen started, but he couldn't help laughing. "Back in the segregation days, this was the spot. Everybody who was anybody came here on the Chitlin circuit, and a lot of the cats from here played, and a lot of the cats from here in town played on the regular." "Yeah?" Casey frowned. "Listen, man, I don't do this no more." "Relax," Jalen said. The way he smiled as he did put Casey at ease, made him feel like he'd been silly to think that Jalen had brought him tagging without telling him beforehand. Inside, the club was in painful disrepair. Chunks of plaster drywall littered the floor, having fallen from the ceiling. Shopping bags, tree branches, and fast food trash littered the floor, having collected here and there like drifting snow. Toward the uptown corner, Casey saw 5 or 6 dirty diapers sitting in a pile. His heart sank as he realized somebody must have been living here. The pastel accents on the dirty bundles hadn't even had a chance to fade. Casey's eyes slid over the tableau until some gravitational force fastened like a tractor beam onto his attention. In the uptown, Casey reminded himself, corner of the club, a mythic scene had been painted in hard, bright colors. Tonky, the robot from the old Pee-wee's Playhouse, knelt with his boombox face upturned as above him a group of sainted jazz musicians, Jelly Roll Morton, Satchmo, Sidney Bechet, James Booker, Fess, gathered around Buddy Bolden, who extended a finger toward Lil Wayne, Juvenile, Trombone Shorty, Jameson Ross, and Kamasi Washington. As Casey stared at the painting, he realized that he'd been wrong about the light in here. At first, he'd assumed that sunlight must be shining down on the painting from holes in the ceiling. But there were no holes, none that he could see here. Outside, the sun had all but set, and there were no streetlights along this stretch of desire. The light shone from the painting itself, and it wasn't because of glow-in-the-dark paint. The halos around the jazzmen's heads, around the more contemporary musicians' heads, all glowed softly, but robustly enough that Casey could see his surroundings, even though the open door they'd used to enter was entirely dark by now. It wasn't just the halos either. Juvenile's oversized white t-shirt gleamed as well, as did Professor Longhair's jewelry. "Wow," Casey said, and as he did, he realized he was speaking as quietly as he would in a church. "What kind of paint you used?" Even as he said it, he realized he made no sense. Paint didn't behave this way. It didn't give off this much light. Jalen ignored the question. "Listen, man, you can't tell nobody about this, though. Not yet." "Who would I tell?" Casey asked. "What am I seeing?" "You know what it is," Jalen said. "Better than anybody." Casey's scalp contracted. "Oh, hey, he said. We said we wouldn't. We said we wouldn't do it on purpose." "I know," Jalen said. "I know. And I didn't. Not at first. I mean, we couldn't ignore it forever." "You couldn't," Casey thought but didn't say. "You ready to see more? You quit smoking?" "Yeah," Jalen said. "Mostly, but I got some." He slid a pack of Newports from his track pants and flipped open the top. Casey took one and Jalen followed suit, then lit both of them. The second drag made Casey lightheaded. He savored the feeling and the dirty blue taste of the smoke. "All right," he said. "What else you got to show me?" Sitting in the passenger seat of Jalen's burnt orange Jeep made Casey feel as if he was inhabiting a former version of himself. This time, instead of filling him with fear as it often did, the feeling warmed him. He and Jail had spent so many nights haunting the city streets in Jail's old Escort GT, either driving aimlessly or tooling around City Park, half-heartedly looking for the old municipal swimming pool that the white folks had filled in with concrete instead of sharing with black folks when integration became law. Even Jalen's piney cologne seemed to be the same scent he'd worn back in the day. Tonight, time had become a silken membrane dividing the present from the past, and he knew for sure that if he could reach from the exact correct angle, he could touch that skin, feel it silken and wet against his fingertips. This wasn't the first time Jalen had shown him something strange. No, the first time was in the summer of 2005, after their first year at UNO. They lived together in a rickety old house on Mandeville Street, and Casey had found a paid internship around the corner at Chez Lazare. June 2005. New Orleans sat steaming in its bowl. The air was so pregnant with moisture, so still, that walking anywhere at all felt like crossing the bottom of the sea. Only the gardenia-scented breeze offered any relief, and it was far from reliable. Sitting on the front porch of Chez Lazare, Casey lit a Newport and puffed thoughtfully as Patricia and Marjane gabbed about something or other, smoking as well. Chez Lazare was situated inside a converted funeral home at the corner of St. Claude Avenue and Elysian Fields. Casey remembered finding the place after reading A Streetcar Named Desire and wondering if this was the very house Tennessee Williams had described. After all, it had the balconies. All it needed was a crazy Polish cat and an overheated ingenue to complete the picture. Next door, Jean's daiquiris and the po' boy shop were painted a bright Pepto-Bismol pink, but Lazare's front-facing building was a simple, muddy gray with dirty white trim. It was the largest of several buildings inside a walled compound along with residence houses for women and children fleeing domestic abuse. Casey had just bought his cigarettes from the Roberts across the street, and Mandisa didn't have any work for her right now, so she was just sitting outside sweating gently in her polo and jean shorts. Mandisa was the home's executive director, and to be honest, until meeting her, Casey hadn't realized a stud could run a nonprofit like this. Patricia was a golden-skinned mixed woman with thick, blunt fingers and prison tattoos, and Marjane was a thin Lebanese girl with sharp, thick eyebrows and delicate wrists. Casey loved listening to them gossip and squabble companionably, but something about Marjane sparked a sense of recognition in her. She wasn't Casey's usual type, too skinny, but every time she was near, Casey felt a quiet little lift in her mood. What did you think, though, Case? She asked. What? Casey said. Of what? You read comics and shit, right? Yeah. So what about it? What'd you think of the new Batman? I mean, it's the best one so far, Casey said, but there's some shit that don't fit with who Batman is, you heard? He lets Ra's al Ghul die in the train at the end. Batman in the comics wouldn't do that shit. I mean, he said, just because I won't kill you doesn't mean I have to save you, Zainab said. Yeah, but death due to inaction goes against the core of his character, Casey said. Bruce Wayne watched his parents die before his eyes, and he set out on a lifelong crusade to make sure nobody else goes out like that on his watch. Letting the demon's head perish, even in a wreck that he caused, is antithetical to Batman's motherfucking motivation. Well, damn, Patricia said. I know, right? Zainab said. She sounded proud, and Casey stretched like a plant in direct sunlight. I told you, Casey knows all that shit. Casey glanced across the street to see a raw-boned black woman charging against traffic. A rust-red Mazda 6 nearly clipped her, and the driver leaned on the horn as the car dopplered down the avenue. The woman wore what looked like a long red sleep shirt mottled with stains and old-school house slippers on her feet. Her braids had come unpinned from her skull, sticking out at odd angles. For an instant, Casey thought she heard shouting, but if she did, it was from far off. When she moved to New Orleans for college, Casey thought she might be overwhelmed by the place, the way it seemed separate from conventional reality. She'd felt none of that, though, not for all that first year. Now, though, as sophomore year approached, she would have these moments of deja vu, these little patches of bullet time where she felt herself drifting against the surface of a giant soap bubble. The woman's hand on Casey's wrist snapped her back into her body, into the present. Please, she hissed through clenched teeth. They gonna kill me. Who? Casey asked. Hey, Marjane said. Get inside, now. She pulled at the woman's hips, gesturing with her chin toward the building's doubled front doors. The woman disappeared into the office, and now Casey did hear shouting. A heavy-set, bullet-headed black man and a short, thick woman were crossing Elysian Fields from the downtown side, just as the other woman had. Y'all see anybody running? The woman called. The man gained the steps. Crackhead-ass woman come this way? He demanded. His voice was flat and hard. Who y'all looking for? Patricia asked. He turned to stare at Casey. You seen her? He asked. You seen anybody? Adrenaline brightened her vision, but Casey noticed a bulge in the man's burgundy jean shorts. It might not be a pistol, but... See who? Casey asked. What's up? Our cousin Marva having a psychotic break or something, the woman said as she climbed the steps. We trying to find her, take her home. She come this way? I didn't see nobody, Patricia said. She inside? Asked the man. What y'all doing here? This is a place of business, Marjane said. We work here. The man grunted dubious and went for the door. Nobody moved to stop him as he led his girlfriend inside. Casey, Marjane, and Patricia waited for a moment in silence. Casey didn't know whether to look at them or to avert her eyes. She realized now that she was physically terrified in a way she hadn't been in years. She'd already been sweating in the heat. Everyone did. One of the things she loved about summer in New Orleans was that nobody held her sweat stains against her. 93 degrees and 100% humidity made the idea of running a few yards in the heat of the day seem utterly absurd. She felt foolish for being surprised. Crazy niggas were bound to show up at a battered women's shelter once in a while. The surprise was that the woman on the run came from outside instead of within. Not for the first time, Casey wondered whether she should have gone with Jalen to get a job down at the beignet stand in City Park, serving pastries and coffee in a paper hat. Interning at Chez Lazare was more interesting, though, and to be honest, the fact that nobody expected her to be at work before 10 in the morning had heavily influenced her decision. The double doors opened again. Mandisa Russell stepped outside, followed by the man and woman. Mandisa was a round, muscular stud with a skin fade and neck tattoos from her days in the Holly Grove projects. "I get it, though," she was saying. "Y'all concerned. Believe me, we see you come through, we let y'all know. I got your cell number and everything." "Didn't mean to scare nobody," the woman said. "Don't tell me," Mandisa said. "Tell my folks out here." The man dipped his bullet head and frowned. "We didn't mean nothing," he said in a chastened tone that made Casey wonder what Mandisa had said to him inside. "We come on strong because we worried." "You good," Casey said reflexively. The man held Casey's gaze for a moment, then seemed to find what he was looking for. He took the woman's elbow and led her back down the front steps. Casey watched them go back the way they had come. Mandisa was the first to pull in a whooping breath. "Well, yo," Patricia said, and shook her head. "Got her out the back before they made it inside," Mandisa said. "I don't know what the fuck that was, but we need to beef up security." She made a point of finding Casey's gaze and holding it. "You good?" "Yeah," Casey said. "Yeah, I never seen something like that. I'm from the suburbs." "Up there in Baltimore, right?" Mandisa said. "Elkridge, Maryland," Casey said. "Yeah." "If I give you the afternoon, you gonna come back to us in the morning?" "Oh, no doubt," Casey said without thinking. On his way back to his LeBaron, Casey checked his razor to see 3 missed calls and a text from Jalen. "Price is right." Casey sucked her teeth. That meant she should grab her gear and come on down as soon as she could. Casey reasoned that Jalen must have scouted a location in the park on his lunch break and wanted to know what Casey thought before they returned to it by night. But no, what kind of location would Jail need Casey's approval for? She pulled into a spot by the Peristyle, an open, columned pavilion designed as a site for dance parties in the early years of the 20th century. Something about the structure reminded Casey of a perfect scoop of sherbet. She loved its lines and the fact that it had been designed for pure enjoyment. As she rounded the back of her Plymouth, she saw Jalen trudging wetly from the direction of the cafe. Sweat stained his short-sleeve white button-down. His bow tie hung loose, and his white and green paper hat dangled from his left hand. He was due for a haircut. His edges weren't as neat as they'd been a few days ago. As he reached his own car, that burnt orange Escort GT, Jalen rolled his eyes theatrically. He gestured with his chin to let Casey know she wouldn't need her gear. Casey slid into the passenger seat of Jalen's car, and they headed out to Marconi Drive. To their right, the buildings of the community college sat quiet, all but asleep for the summer. Moments later, Jalen turned right down Zachary Taylor Drive, and Casey knew where they must be headed. Here, the breeze held better sway than it did in the Marigny. Jail's AC was broken, but the perfumed air slid through the car and made Casey forget the dangers she'd faced earlier in the day. When she was little, Casey had taken City Park for granted. It was just a cool place her New Orleans family would bring her for cookouts or to visit the art museum or the little Storyland theme park. In those days, she'd been unaware of the park's vastness. It was significantly larger than Central Park in New York City. The fact that much of it had been abandoned when the golf course had fallen into disuse meant that the park was largely an undiscovered country. If New Orleans felt like an alternate reality banana public hidden in the bottom of the country, City Park was the treasure secreted in one of its socks. Jalen parked at Pan American Stadium, and together they struck out on foot. They hadn't been back to this location since Jail had started work at the cafe, but this little clubhouse is one of Casey's favorites. Last time they were here, she had used it to test out a couple characters she'd been toying with. B Sharp, a Pam Grier type with an afro and bubbled sunglasses, whose arms were covered in a swarm of bees, and her arch nemesis, the hanging judge, a wizened, hateful man in judicial robes and a powdered wig who commanded an army of mutant pigs in SWAT gear. Casey's heart sank as they reached the low, broad concrete building. Someone had erased the judge. B Sharp hung at the center of the wall, gritting his teeth as he projected the swarm from his right arm at a blank patch of wall where the villain should have been. Wait. What the fuck? Casey said aloud. Sharp was positioned wrong. Casey had painted him standing over the judge, flexing in triumph as he drove his right foot, Bruce Lee style, into the judge's sternum. Not only had the judge been eliminated from the scene, it was almost as if B Sharp was Casey shook his head. It was silly, but it really did look like B Sharp was reacting to the judge's escape. Removing the art was one thing. The city was full of self-righteous dickheads who felt street art contributed to the moral decline of New Orleans. But this was something else. To come behind Casey and repaint his figures. It was an insult so grave that Casey was almost more impressed than offended. "What?" was all he could think to say. "I came over here on lunch to see if we might want to tag the other side and found your mural like this. Don't make no sense." Who would do this? "Man, I'm confused than a mug. You ask me, it looks like that nigga left." Casey flinched. She hated the idea. Even more, she hated that she'd been thinking the same thing. That strange, dreamlike feeling from earlier had returned. She had the distinct feeling that if she were to look away from B Sharp right now, when she looked back, something significant about the painting would have changed. His position, his facial expression, something. "That's not funny," she said slowly. "Nah," Jalen said, "it ain't. But the real question is, what is we gonna do?" "I don't know," Casey said. "I don't." She didn't realize until she and Jalen were headed back to their apartment in their separate cars that when she had first drawn him, B Sharp had been a woman. Okay. Man, I didn't realize until right now that, half my face was out of frame as I was reading because I was leaning over like a maniac. Anyway, so, all this material is still pretty rough. But it's one of those cases where I almost feel led by it instead of that I'm leading it and making these plot decisions. But it's falling into place in this, really fascinating way. And so that's a little bit of it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. This is probably my longest video that I've done so far. So hope you enjoy. Hopefully I can get this up before tomorrow because it's going to take forever to post. All right, bye.